apartment owners to find, to make a connection, to find people who wanted to sell their properties or find out their plan. And I picked up the phone and called a company that owned a 116 unit deal in North Richland Hills. And looking at the ownership and doing the research, I found out it was owned by the Community Enrichment Center. And the Community Enrichment Center was a group that they help, they provide safe housing to battered women and children. They teach them a program, they provide education, and they change the life of people. It wasn't just a handout, it wasn't a welfare, for life. It was truly a 12-month program where they taught these abused women skills that they could take out into the world and better their lives for themselves and their children. So it's something that I really believed in. I really supported this organization. And in my conversation with the guy that very first day, he wasn't a seller. He was very much, comfortable where he was. So I wrote him a nice little note because I really enjoyed our talk. It was probably a 20-minute conversation. And I guess when you're prospecting, you're, probably supposed to keep those pretty short, but I enjoyed that call. Wrote him a quick note. And a few weeks later, he phones me back and says, I think you might be able to help me. There is a property that has come to market that I would like your representation on. And it was the Cedar Ridge Townhomes. So the Cedar Ridge Townhomes, located in Hurst, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas and Fort Worth, and it sits right in the middle of it. But it was built in the early 80s. I would consider it more of a B minus, so a B deal, B class deal, with 50 units out of 116. It was a fractured condo. When they were originally built, 81, 82 was probably a downturn in one of our cycles, and not everybody was buying the condos. So one guy came in and he bought a large package. So he purchased those 30 years ago and was now ready to sell. So the CEC, the Community Enrichment Objective, was to sell their 25 single-family residential homes that were scattered throughout Dallas and Fort Worth. And they wanted to save travel time for their maintenance guy. They wanted to bring the families closer to their headquarters, which was in North Richland Hills. And they had received the offering memorandum. It had no financials in it. They wanted the price to be determined by the market. And again, this is 2013. So we obtained the T6, which we didn't even get a T12. We just got a trailing 6 months, and it was 124,000 NOI. So at that time in the market, we were seeing cap rates. We had just come out of the 10, 11, 12 market, and so 2013. We made an offer at $2 million and submitted our letter of intent. So we submitted that, as you can see, in September of 2013, sent it to the listing broker, who also was the property management company. Very tight with this group. The management company and broker were very tight with the ownership. So we got no response. No response from a very professional letter of intent with a qualified, motivated buyer. So 6 months later, 7 months later, we submit another letter of intent, which again is heard by no response. No response from the listing broker / management company. First and second offers 6 months apart. So I just continued to persevere. I do a little homework and know who the ownership is. They live in Honolulu, Hawaii. So I wrote a letter directly to the owner. Well, in this time period, we also found out that the husband had passed away. And so I'm sending this letter directly to Hawaii in June of 2014 to the wife. So I thought. We even sent earnest money. We sent the full contract, earnest money. I, felt maybe the listing broker didn't want to sell it. Maybe he wasn't managing it. I couldn't really understand why I wasn't getting a phone call back. So we certainly had obstacles to overcome. The owner passes away. We found out there was no will, and there were multiple heirs. So the lady that I had sent the letter to and with the contract in June of 2014 was his ex-wife from 20 years ago. He had multiple children there that were adult children and had since remarried and had many more children. So there were a lot of heirs. This had to go through probate. So we had to wait, and we waited another entire year. So we took 2015 without any letters of intent or contracts. I constantly called. I talked to my owner frequently. So we had 2016 comes around. We did get updated financials. I got an updated rent roll. Something that had taken place in this time period is the market's changing. You know, we're starting to see the uptick of property values. We're seeing a compression of cap rates. You know, debt's still readily available, and this property is still in probate. My group, the Community Enrichment Center, it still met their needs. Now, keep in mind, they weren't going to immediately pick out all 50 families that lived there. As the releases became available and they renewed they were going to place families into this property. It was right adjacent to a school. It was near bus transportation. It was near the mall. It was near major employment. So it really fit a great location. So 2016, again, we get the updated financials, the rent roll, values going up. Then we get to 2017. Finally, 3 years into this, we have a true offering memorandum. We have a complete package with financials. They had projected their NOI, though, at $185,000. That's a projection. That's a pro forma. We all know that, yeah, you can't sell a deal on performance. It's got to be the actuals. So we get the actuals, and the NOI had actually gone down. So now we have a property, and they're wanting the market to dictate the price. So they've got a property that has gone up in price, gone down in an NOI, and we don't really know the condition. We had never toured, other than driving by, we had not toured this property. We had not seen inside the unit. Now, through the course of time, what I was doing was pulling the individual owner-occupied townhomes, condos, and I was constantly sending them to the CEC on what they were selling for. We had seen them go from 65, 70,000 a unit, now 100, 125 a unit. Even just recently, I saw one that traded at 159,000 a door. So there's still some value in this, definitely, but noting the NOI is changing. So over the course of our 4-year period, the price went from $2 million to 3.6. Earnest money changed from 20,000 to 100,000. And finally, in 2017, we submit our final letter of intent in April of 2017. We spent a month and a half back and forth on who's going to draft the contract, dealing with people in California, dealing with the owners in Hawaii, dealing with the property management company and the brokerage. Finally, we had a contract that was received from the sellers on June 6, 2017. We then spent another entire month negotiating that contract back and forth. And that was definitely something that was interesting. I can do a contract that's in less than an hour. It's, you know, I don't see why something takes 2.5, 3 months to do a contract, but it wasn't my contract, and I was, we were continually working the deal. If you can take a look here, it's kind of interesting to think about. They were going to buy this and put their down payment in and get, if you look at, you know, the alternative, I mean, maybe a 2% internal rate of return. This did not make financial sense. To me, this is one I'm like, you guys, this isn't the way to buy this. But they wanted, it met their needs. They wanted to purchase this. They had relationships with a bank that was going to provide the financing regardless of the debt coverage ratio and regardless of the income. So I'm thinking, okay. Now, they did have value in the individual, if they were to sell the individual unit, because they were individually titled. I saw this as a great opportunity. I would have loved to have been part of this purchase as an investor, and I would have parceled them out and sold them all off after I made, $10,000, $15,000 a unit improvement. But it wasn't my deal. It was the community enrichment centers, and it met their needs. So in July, we finally get our executed contract, actually have it signed off on, and now we're ready to tour the unit. We're ready to finally do our due diligence. However, we had more issues to resolve. So I do love the saying, and that's begin with the end in mind. One of my favorites, I believe Stephen Covey. And again, this deal met the needs. So I stayed with them, persevered. I had to a lot of times put aside my financial analytical mindset and say, yeah, this doesn't make sense, guys. It was their deal. We've gone down on the NOI. They're now buying it at a sub-4 cap. And we were seeing in 2017, we were seeing some A-class deals trade, maybe a 4.25, maybe a 4.75, so a sub-5. I hadn't seen anything at a sub-4. So this was very interesting to me. It was also, they had very high expenses. Their expenses were almost $6,500 a door on a multifamily property. Now, this did have an HOA, and the HOA was quite expensive. So the controlling your expenses were going to be a little challenging from a standpoint of taking on the 50 units out of the 116, because the HOA really had control of your money. So we went through our due diligence, and I always prepare an extensive due diligence checklist. And this particular contract, which the sellers drafted, I don't think they caught this was in there, but in the contract, the sellers had 3 days to deliver the due diligence items. And as you can see, here's a big laundry list of all the items. Well, in the contract, it was written that every day they failed to deliver the due diligence time period was extended according. So if it took them 3 more days, it extended 3 days. And our time period did not start until we had all of the documents. We literally never got all of the documents. So we're a month and a half into our due diligence time period. We had 21 days, right? Well, the 21 days never started. So in our discovery, we found out there were foundation issues. There were court cases. One particular owner, so in a quad of 4 units, the CEC was buying 3, and one of those units was individually owned. And she had brought her property to market to sell it. She had foundation repairs in that building, and whenever they did the resale certificate, the HOA company failed to disclose that there were foundation work. Now, the owner had disclosed to that individual buyer, but the HOA company did not. So that buyer said, I'm not sure what's going on here, and they walked away. So that single owner sued the HOA, and that was a court case that was going to impact one of their buildings they're buying.
Heather?
Yes. Yes.
Do you feel like the HOA was purposefully putting some spikes in the wheel a little bit, trying to slow this transaction down?
That's a great question. So the HOA had just changed HOA management, but note the listing broker, who was also the management company, also managed the HOA at one point in time for many years. So it was their property in essence. The ownership was very absent. Obviously, the people in Hawaii. So I think there was HOA companies are put in place to maintain the continuity of a property, the visual aesthetic appeal, the maintenance of it, right? So I definitely believe the HOA was very, lackadaisical. I think they just collected a lot of money. I haven't been involved with a lot of HOAs, but I definitely we discovered a lot during our due diligence that really it made it very frustrating for the CEC to move forward because of the HOA.
Right.
One of their objectives through this was to get control of the HOA and be part of that and control what they're doing and making improvements to the property.
And so would the HOA have been retained after the sale to CEC?
They were on the property. Remember, it's 116 units. So yes, they stayed in place. There was no way to get rid of the HOA unless they were to purchase all of the individually owned units. But what they could do was get on the board with the HOA, be part of the voting, be part of the board that made those decisions. So if you think about buying 50 units, you have the majority of votes because there was no one else that owned more than 2 or 3 units. There were a few investors in there and they had a couple of units. There were a lot of people that had lived there 20, 30 years. They had owned the properties. And now you had someone who was coming in buying a package of the 50. So you had the majority of the vote to be the same unless all of 66 units, other owners voted against you, you would have the majority.
Right, I understand. Thank you.
Good question. So we discover all of these things, not just court cases and foundation issues. There was one particular unit, and I love the saying that, a painter's house is always the last to get painted, but the maintenance man lived on site, had been there for many, many years, and literally had holes in his ceiling. His ceiling was falling down. And it was incredible to walk these units, and he would say, yeah, he would fix it, and, it would shift, and, next thing you know, he's got another big piece of sheetrock hanging down over his stairs. So really interesting. We did get a lot of reports from foundation companies. We got a lot of quotes. There were some other electrical, there were some hot water heaters that weren't to code and things of that sort. So it was a pretty big laundry list. But we get down August 22nd. Again, we had executed this back early July, so we're well within a long due diligence time period, and the buyers do want to move forward, but they want to move forward at a price. This was, again, a year ago. We weren't seeing any retrades. If you retraded a deal, you lost out on the deal, and another buyer was waiting in the wings. That was just the nature of the market, and so we took a chance, came in with a $100,000 price reduction, and if the sellers would have agreed to that, the buyer was ready to move forward. So we sent that on again on August 22nd. It took them a whole another week. Nothing happened fast. It was all very unbelievable, the timing that it took. So we finally get a response that they had agreed to a $50,000 price reduction. So first of all, we were really surprised they came back with anything. We really thought it would be a no, and my buyers were going to have to make a decision. So we got the $50,000 price reduction. We did an amendment, and the buyer's earnest money went hard, non-refundable. So there was something else that took place at this time was within an HOA, you have resale certificates. And so being 50 units, the HOA wanted $350 for each individual resale certificate.
Good heavens.
Well, I'm sorry?
I said, good heavens.
Yeah. Well, so then the sellers wanted to utilize the buyer's earnest money that was held on deposit for the payment of those resale certificates with an agreement that they would be reimbursed at closing. So we really thought about this for a while because it was like, okay, I'm thinking the ownership, there's no one wanting to pony up this money. The management company doesn't want to pony it up. It's probably not in the operating budget. So the buyer said, you know what, sure. will allow, and I believe it was 20 to 30,000, something like that, that went towards these resale certificates, all 50 of them. And they held that, took it from the earnest money, and then the buyer got it back at closing on the closing statement. So we finally get there. We're getting to the closing. This is early October, and loan had been done. Loan was approved. It was a banking relationship that the lender at the bank was on the board with the CEC, and there's definitely, you know, an ability to finance it. The CEC actually put all of their other properties, their 25 other single-family homes that were debt-free, as collateral. So even though the numbers didn't make sense, the debt coverage ratio didn't meet, it was a very low cap rate, there was collateral, not just with this property, but with their others. So it definitely made sense. So we get down to the closing, we get to the title, and on a Friday, the day of closing, documents had already been sent to the seller, quickly signed off. Buyer meets the title company at an event center in Grapevine, because the title company was in Dallas, buyers in North Richland Hills. And they're looking at this, and they're looking at these documents, and the title company realizes the name of, they had assigned the trust, wasn't the name that was on all the closing documents. Now, you would think that somewhere along the way, enough people had looked at this, okay? I'm not one as a broker to really evaluate title. I don't feel like that's my role. I certainly stayed in this far beyond and maybe what most brokers might do, or most agents. But again, I felt connected to the CEC, and I really liked working with them, and it was good. But I didn't catch this. The title company didn't catch this. The sellers on the other side, out in Hawaii, signed off, had sent it over. We're literally down at the closing table sitting there, and the buyer says, well, this name says this, and this name says this. Is that okay? And it was like, oh, no, that's not okay. So that's a Friday afternoon. Needless to say, we didn't close. There was not a transfer of property that day. And so we went another, by the time the papers were redrawn the next week, sent back to Hawaii, redone, and then everything else came back. It finally, buyers signed off, it closed, and it funded. It was a deal that, again, took 4 years, many obstacles along the way, and the buyers stayed in, the deal changed, the numbers changed, and they stayed in and wanted the deal. And I still call them, and they still talk to me. So that was, any questions?
I have a question, actually. So you said that CEC, the buyers, had a relationship with a bank. Do you think, how important was that to this deal actually getting done?
I think that was critical. They actually had a couple of options. So there was, I would often attend their monthly board meetings that they would have usually on the last Wednesday of the month. And they would talk about the conflict of interest with a board member providing the loan. And they all voted unanimously to allow the board member to be the lender, because it wasn't their needs that were being serviced, it was meeting the needs of the CEC. So I definitely think the bank got it done, but I think a lot of different banks might have been able to do this, maybe not in this time frame, but having the other properties as collateral. So they brought cash to the table, they put money out of pocket, and they had those as collateral. So it was very much a one-for-one balance. So it wasn't like, you know, if the CEC were to default on the debt, the bank had 25 deals and 50 units. So they were going to win.
Okay. All right, I see. Oh, here we go. Someone says, congratulations on your perseverance. Knowing what you did now, knowing what you do now, what would you have done differently? That's a good question.
That is a great question. I feel like there was a lot of things that hindered or stagnated this deal, and I want to be very careful about talking about other brokers and agents and management companies, but I feel very strongly that this particular group didn't have, I think, the seller's interests. I think they were all about their own interests. Again, they managed the property. At one point, they also controlled the HOA. They managed the HOA. So there were some dollars going into their pockets all along the way that there was no incentive for them to really sell the deal. So knowing what I know now, I don't ever want to circumvent a broker, because I mean, I'm one myself. So by going directly to the owner in 2014, it wasn't that I was trying to kick them out or knock them out. I just wanted some form of communication. Mm-hmm. I just don't know why or how we didn't get the responses that I think are, we as professional practitioners in commercial real estate, we owe the other broker, we owe our clients, sellers or buyers, we owe them that. That's our fiduciary responsibility, and I just don't feel like that happened. So mm-hmm. I honestly, without controlling them, I don't know what I could have done differently.
All right, looks like we have questions in Metro Text and Lufkin.
Okay, Metro Text, we're ready. Go ahead.
Hi.
Speak up.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me, but my name is Ladina, and I got in on a portion of your deal, which I think is phenomenal. I'm in the middle of a commercial deal, but it's for land, and I'm wondering, during the course of your deal, did your buyers have to continue to extend the independent consideration period, or was that over pretty quickly and it just went into the earnest money being held? How did that work for you?
Okay, great question. So the independent consideration time period, or the due diligence time period, feasibility study, whatever you want to call it, it was 21 days. But keep in mind, the way the contract was written was that time period did not start until we had received all of the due diligence documents. So here's what I think really happened. I think the contract we received from the attorneys in Hawaii, they had used this maybe on a deal they represented a buyer. So when we get this contract and we're reviewing it, and it was 37 pages of not a promulgated form, and being a broker, I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to interpret the law, I'm going to read the contract though, and I'm going to know our time period. And when I read that the first time, I went, wow, this says 21-day due diligence, but it's not going to start until we get all of our items. That's fantastic. That really holds the seller's feet to the fire, or it should, to deliver all the documents. And the documents are all stated right there in the contract. There is nothing that is hidden. So we didn't have to do any extensions because our time period did not start until we had all the documents, which we never got. So
interesting.
So I'm going to keep going just for a second. If you're in a land deal and you're continually needing to extend your time period, usually there is money required, and I'm even seeing non-refundable money right now. I'm working some other deals. There's a lot of times, and sellers can do it. They don't have to allow you that time to extend. They want to know you're serious, and by non-refundable, when people usually lose money, they're serious.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
We had a question from Lufkin, and I think someone in Lubbock had their hand up as well, but let's go with Lufkin. Go ahead.
Okay, so I didn't think it was ethical to be able to reach out to the seller directly when you don't represent them. You represent the buyer.
Okay, and I'm a broker, and I should absolutely know that answer, but keep in mind, as practitioners, we can do what we are asked to do by our clients. The buyer, because we're getting absolutely no response from the listing broker who also manages the property. I mean, no response. no return phone call, no email, no response. My buyer asked me to reach out to them directly.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, somebody else had typed in that question asking if it was your decision or if the client made the suggestion, and so, yeah, sounds like it was your client's suggestion. Is there anything a person can do, and this is just from my place of not understanding all about real estate, but if your client had not made that suggestion and you had just never heard anything, it would have just evaporated?
That, or we just would have waited. Again, I stayed in contact with them. In my form of business, talking to people, I like to talk to people I like, but not always do I get to. So, in my conversations, my prospecting, I checked in with the CEC. I called them. We usually spoke every 2 to 3 weeks. And again, I would go to their board meetings and give them an update of silence, and nothing had transpired. I don't know what I could have done different other than just be patient and wait for the deal. I could have disappeared. I could have stopped calling them. I could have not stayed in contact with the CEC. And I probably in 2017, that particular broker would have contacted them, and they may have bought the deal without me.
Okay. All right, we have a question in Lubbock. Go, Kirk.
Hi, Heather. Wanted to ask you, so the broker that represented the seller did not have a listing. They were just doing the property management. And so were they involved? Did they receive a commission on their side, or was?
So I believe that brokerage, which also managed it, I believe they did have the listing, but he also managed it. So in 2017, when we got back into the deal, the broker I had been dealing with connected me with one of the newer individuals in his office who was fresh out of college, and hey, we all start somewhere. And it was a huge learning experience for him. He had not really understood a lot about the deal. He was, getting it, basically got handed off. So I dealt with someone completely different there in the last, 6-7 months of the transaction. It was a listing, so it was their listing, and they managed it.
So is that how CEC became aware of the property? Was that it was on the market?
What was the question? How did he become aware the property was on the market?
How did the buyer become aware of the property? Through broker's listing marketing material, or how did he come?
Yes. So in 2013, when I had reached out to them, had a call, wrote them the note, a few weeks later, he calls me back and he says, something came across my desk that is of interest. So yes, that listing broker through marketing sent it to, and I don't know how many people got it, but my client hired me to represent him. And in multifamily, it's not always that a listing broker welcomes an outside broker. They want to do the deal themselves.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Zulika Hussein.
Hi, I have a couple questions on the property when you were doing the analysis and you thought that it wasn't going to be making them the money. And can we go back to that for a minute and what you thought about it that made you feel like they should continue going forward with a price, and how did you come up with that price?
So in the market, I knew what things were selling for. So this particular property easily had a value of $100,000 a door, easily. So if you take 50 units, that's $5 million, right? So there's other deals that had traded. If they could have gotten this at $75,000 a door, it was still a good deal. And not wanting to press because we hadn't toured units, we didn't even know a lot about the foundation issues. None of that in our 3-year time period that had gone by had we discovered. So based on what the market was, based on what other things are selling for, we came in at $3.5 million. They countered at 3.6, and there were multiple offers on the table. And if my guys wanted it, they had to step up and pay it.
Looks like he hadn't contacted that owner. That thing anymore.
Go ahead, Zulika.
Quick question that I'm coming back to is you were determining based on what was selling in that area, and since Texas is a non-disclosure state, I always have trouble because CoStar doesn't always report. So how were you able to determine what was selling in the area? What kind of, I would say, resources did you approach for or utilize?
Great question. And that is a very difficult thing to often know what things are trading at. And this is where it is helpful to be an expert in your market, to know deals that are trading. They might not be reporting because it is a non-disclosure state, but if you know that particular property traded at $68,000 and that one traded at $87,000 a door, to know that and to keep that information is so helpful. This particular property is in Hearst. I've done other deals in Hearst. I know a lot of the owners in Hearst. I've seen a lot of deals trade. I live in Hearst, so it's kind of my backyard. If you were to take the 116 unit complex right there, the value was much higher. But if you incorporate some of the other apartment complexes that had traded, some were built in the 70s, some were a little bit newer. But if you really find your average there, it was very much in line with the market. So it is just knowing your market. It's knowing what things are trading, and whether you keep that in your own database. I'm constantly looking at rent comps and sell comps and understanding what things are trading at on a per door basis, per square foot as well.
Steve, is that it for you guys there? Okay, I have a couple of typed questions in. Someone asked, did the listing broker have an existing listing agreement with the seller for sale or just for management? And I think we answered that. It was both, apparently.
I never saw the agreement. So, you know what, it was just an assumption. I did execute a broker agreement with that broker that I would be compensated.
Oh, okay. Someone asks, if I understand correctly, the seller's attorney came back with the due diligence list. Do you normally have a similar due diligence list of items and request the 21 equal or less days to R-E-C-E-D? I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean.
Maybe it's proceed. So I'll just answer both. There's a couple questions there. So whenever I have an executed contract, I take every single item that's on the due diligence list in the contract and I create a checklist. I create it for myself, for my clients that I represent. It streamlines it, it marks it off on the date, how it was received, and then if there's any comments about it. So I took exactly what was in the contract, I put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I keep that updated throughout the transaction. The 21-day time period was in the contract pre-written that we received from the seller's attorney. Again, it had that the time period didn't start until it was until we received all of the documents.
So I just want to make sure I have this correct. You think that the original contract you got from them had been drawn up for that company for a purchase, and they just reutilized it for this without perhaps being as careful as they should have been in examining their terms?
I absolutely. If I represented a seller, first of all, I'm not going to be the one to write the contract. If this were my seller's attorney that prepared this contract, I would have asked them, okay, why would you want to tie this to a date? That's very buyer favorable. Mm-hmm. So it's buyer friendly. So if it were my seller, I wouldn't have wanted it to start when they got everything. You know, because technically there's never a start date. It just kind of went on and on. So
yeah, interesting. That's funny. Okay, and then someone says, is a listing broker obligated to respond to another broker or counselor within a specific time period after a specific inquiry or contact?
So in commercial real estate, I don't know where it's written that there is an obligation. I think it is our fiduciary responsibility to reply to whatever comes in, but to control or to police or to demand what a listing broker does is so far beyond what we can do unless we make reports or things like that. And I just know how I do business wasn't this way, but I couldn't control the listing broker and how they chose to respond to us.
Right. So here's a question that I have. How was this deal affected by the fact that CEC is a not-for-profit company? Do you think you would have pushed for different terms if their end goal hadn't been, to provide housing for people? This is not a real estate trust or anything like that. Do you think that would have changed the way you encouraged them with their terms and whatnot? If it had been someone who was looking to make more of a profit?
So I definitely think going down to the financial side of it, and because I'm very analytical, the numbers have to make sense. It's got to pencil out. Your DCR's got to meet. There's all these things when I'm analyzing on the behalf of my clients, the deal's got to make sense. So this deal didn't make sense from an investment standpoint. So it absolutely, at every single meeting that we had with them, at the end of the meeting, it was, they all pushed their papers away and said, but it meets our needs. It meets our needs. So it's almost like they didn't, I'm sure they cared, but obviously being a nonprofit, they weren't in it for profit. It certainly helped in providing the housing. But here's where the opportunity was. Here's where I was able to show them that these expenses are really high and you could control these expenses, and you're going to have collections and you're going to have income coming in. So the income that would come in goes into their operating budget to fund more assistance or whatever it might be for other families. So they were going to make money at some point. There was going to be a bit of a turnaround time frame that this had to take place. Rents were going up. This property had not increased rents over the course of time. Obviously, as we got in, we realized the repairs that were needed. I've since talked to them, and they've been in the process of making improvements, going nicely. They're not putting, again, 100% of families in every unit. They do have some units that are occupied by people that are not related to the CEC. So they do have income. Yes.
We have another question here.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. I heard you say earlier that working with the CEC, when it came to the financials, they came to the table with cash, they had collateral. Did they have a traditional banking relationship? Because a lot of banks are not very giving to non-for-profit organizations. So did they have a traditional banking relationship that was already established? Did they go out and get a traditional loan? How did that portion of the financing work for them?
So the answer to the question is yes. They had a banking relationship. They also have no debt. So a nonprofit organization that has no debt is favorable. I never saw all of the financials of the Community Enrichment Center, but I knew they were very financially stable in providing the programs that they did for people. So they had a lot of income generators, income sources. There's a little resale shop that they would sell things at. They had a furniture resale shop where people would come in and donate, so somewhat like Goodwill, but there are other, people would drop off clothing and they would sell them. They would also put their, people to work there, giving them training. One of my favorite, just a little side note, one of my favorite board meetings I was at, as we were getting closer to the transaction, a lady had sent in a picture of her and her daughter, and she was holding her certificate where she had just graduated from pharmaceutical or pharmacy school, and she was giving back $500 to the organization because how they helped her and her daughter have a safe place to live. She got education, and now she's out in the world making money and giving back. So I really believe in that. And so I think that their banking relationships help. I think their no debt help. And just the fact that what they're doing in the community was a positive overall impact.
Whoop. Hang on, you're muted, dear. Okay, go again.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, but the fact that they were a not-for-profit did not actually legally affect the terms of the loan?
No, and I didn't get their loan documents, so I didn't read them. I honestly don't know. I just knew in our meetings and conversation, because again, the board member worked at the bank who helped coordinate the loan. So.
All right. Someone has brought up that it is a new addition to the NAR Code of Ethics that the seller's agent is required to reply in writing to acknowledge the delivery of a buyer's offer. And someone else says that she just took broker responsibility and we're told it's 3 calendar days to respond to sponsored salespersons, clients, and license holders representing other parties in real estate transaction, and she's quoting the TREC reg. So it sounds like you're selling, your listing agent from the seller side was just falling down all over the place.
Yeah, and again, this is going back, 3-4 years ago. I'm not sure how long that's been in place, but there were probably a lot of things about this transaction from the listing brokerage side that was very unethical.
Yeah, sounds like it. But you got it done. You got it done, and that's what's important. Do we have any other questions for Heather? Have they started moving into the property yet?
Oh yeah, so again, we closed last October. When we closed, they had 5 vacancies. There was actually a lot of people that were living there that weren't paying rent, so they had to have some evictions. And then they started working on improvements. I think they placed a few of their families there, but the others they've been renting. So they're making improvements.
All right. And are you ever going to handle a probated property again?
If I can avoid it, that would be great. I think there's going to be circumstances that are beyond our control that we might not always be able to dictate. So never say never.
Was that the first time you've been in anything that complicated as far as probate went?
As far as probate, certainly I've worked on, complicated deals throughout the course of my years. And, I've worked on deals that are 300 units and, you get a lot of different moving parts. Yeah.
Cool. All right, great. Any other questions for anybody? Oh, here's one popped up again. Steve Holtzworth says, congratulations for having your heart in the right place and seeing the end in the beginning. So apparently that person agrees with your quote there, which is a good one. I'm going to try and remember that myself. This is great. I mean, speaking for myself, one of the reasons when I saw this application for the award, I got all excited because this is the kind of thing that realtors do, I think, better than other kinds of agents and brokers, is have a concern for their local market, because you guys live there. You care about what happens in your communities, and this really, I thought, encapsulated all of the realtor values and ethics that we work so hard to spread around. So this was great. Steve, I see you're unmuted. Do you have any more questions?
No more questions from this side.
Okay.
Just wanted to say thank you, Heather, and congratulations.
Yeah, it was a great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Oh, and
Okay.
I got one more question. Someone's asking about commission. You don't have to. Someone asks, can you tell us what kind of commission the buyer paid you?
The buyer.
I'm just reading the question. Of course, she doesn't have to answer that.
No, I really, you know what? Can I talk about this? I don't mind.
Well, that's
No.
No?
No.
No?
Okay.
Is that a code of ethics thing?
You know what? I was rewarded greatly, and it may not have been in a financial gain,
All right.
but I was compensated. I did receive a commission from the listing, from the seller side. The buyer did not pay me.
All right, great. All right, well, if that's all, then I'm gonna wrap this up. Heather, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you worked really hard on this deal, and I know you worked really hard on this presentation too, so I'm really grateful to you for helping out. We are going to, again, we'll post the recording of this webinar, and I'm going to try and get a Heather slideshow from her to post that as well. And you'll be able to find that in the events tool on the TAR website. Our next commercial webinar is going to be August 21st, also at 10 a.m. in the morning. That webinar is going to be taught by Mishika Guillory, and it will be on how not to practice unauthorized law while using TAR commercial contracts, which I think is going to be a good one. Mishka's been working really closely with the legal staff here, so and we'll have Kinski on hand for that webinar as well to answer questions. That one's also going to be available for CE credit, same bat time, same bat station. If you would like credit for that webinar, call your local board. Remember that local boards always get right of first refusal for CE courses. If your local board can't provide it, get hold of me or get hold of John Hauser in professional development here at the TAR offices. And yes, so now I'm not just a talking head from the void. And we can set you up with a remote classroom at your office if there's more than a couple brokers there and you want CE for that. We're happy to set that up. We have a conference coming up. If you haven't registered for conference in San Antonio in September, you can do that at TexasRealtorsConference.com. You can register. We're going to have some great commercial events that first day. And our bus tour to Brooks Air Force Base, they're doing a new multi-use development on Brooks now. So we're all excited about that. You can always reach me. It's agamber@TexasRealtors.com, or you can call here at TAR if you have any questions or suggestions on other topics. And I think with that, we will wrap up for the day. Thanks everybody for joining us. Heather, thanks again, and congratulations on a great deal. And we will see you guys in a month. Everybody take care, be well. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.